partners. Good morning on the third day of the Sea of Solutions annual partnership event, focusing on accelerating solutions to reduce plastic pollution. Before I introduce myself, let me thank UNEP, the coordinating body on the seas of East Asia, supported by the government of Sweden, and our co-host, the government of Malaysia, for making this event possible. The Sea of Solutions is a flagship event for the Sea Circular project of UNEP, which brings together partners to address marine plastic pollution through their own and collaborative efforts. I see there are more than 600 participants registered for today's event. We all have a lot to learn from our 4 technical panelists who are amongst the best minds on innovative financing in the context of dealing with plastic waste collection and recycling. Let me now introduce myself. I'm Geeta Sabharwal, the UN Resident Coordinator for Thailand, and I will be moderating for the day. I have to admit, I'm not an expert on plastic pollution or even circular economy, but I'm looking forward to the opportunity to learn more about innovative financing solutions, collaborative thinking, and actions to accelerate and deliver results to keep plastics in the economy and out of the environment. Let me now introduce our 4 panelists. We have Ina Balik, working with ValueCred, Yunus Environment Hub. Ina has worked for over a decade on carbon markets and more recently on plastic credit mechanisms as a new financing instrument. She's also been closely following the COP26 agreement and its impact on plastics. Ina, a very, very warm welcome to you. I know you're taking the call from Germany and it's 3:30 in the morning for you. Many thanks for taking the time to join us. Our next panelist is Steve Hartman, Director of the Plastics Collective. He's a social entrepreneur with extensive experience working on plastic recycling projects that are often community-based and managed by vulnerable and indigenous communities. He will be sharing insights from a bottom-up perspective. And Steve is joining us from London, and indeed a very early start for you as well, Steve. Welcome.
Thank you.
Our third panelist is Luann Sien, Managing Director of the CIMB Group. Given that CIMB is a regional bank with a head office in Malaysia, Luann is very well positioned to share her perspective on financial sustainability and green lending and the difference that lending can make to plastic pollution. Welcome to you, Luann. And our final panelist is Dr. Teresa Mudita Lim, Executive Director of the Asean Center for Biodiversity. Dr. Teresa's expertise on biodiversity, wildlife management, and policy, including regional cooperation on conservation and nature-based solutions, will enrich today's discussion as we look at cleaning up biodiversity hotspots and creating new entry points for action. Thank you, Dr. Teresa, for joining from the Philippines. My task this morning is to get the best out of our 4 panelists. To make that happen, we have divided the 90-minute session into 5 parts. We will begin with a 2-minute video, followed by 3 rounds of questions for our panelists, which will be interspersed with a poll. We will then take questions from the floor. Please feel free to type in your questions in the chat function that is available, and we will ensure that as many as possible are taken up during the 90 minutes that we have today. So without further ado, let's kickstart the session. Let me begin by sharing key points from my perspective at the UN in relation to innovative financing. At a country level, there is no one-size-fits-all financial solutions for addressing plastic pollution. I strongly believe that the most effective response will come from each country figuring out what works in their own context. In Thailand, as an upper middle income country, the UN has sought solutions based on coalitions with government, the private sector, and civil society. Last month, the UN, with the Ministry of Finance, held a high-level roundtable on sustainable financing, which brought together 43 banks and financial institutions with a combined asset base of $1.3 trillion in a landmark commitment to the UN principles of responsible banking and investment. We already have 22% of the banking sector in Thailand committed to sustainable financing through lending and green investing, which we hope to double this year to match global numbers. At present, there are 146 ESG stocks on the stock exchange of Thailand, which is expected to increase in line with investor appetite. Financial institutions in country report that ESG tends to reduce risk and increases benefits for portfolios and higher rates of return. And I'm sure Luann will talk more to this from her experience at the CIMB. In terms of reducing plastic waste, we do not need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to innovative financing, with models available from actions on biodiversity, carbon markets, and nature-based solutions, which I know Ina and Steve will talk more comprehensively to. Unlocking investments for plastics will be critical for keeping alive the 1.5-degree average warming goal laid out in the Paris Agreement, wherein more than 450 firms representing $130 trillion of assets committed to net zero emissions by 2050. COP26 has also spurred momentum as it brings about a focus on plastics and the release of greenhouse gases. We know that recycling plastics means a lower carbon footprint than using virgin plastic raw material. Very conservative estimates suggest that recycled plastics lowers greenhouse gases by about 30% compared to virgin raw material. This tells us that moving from disposables to recycling has a potential for huge savings in greenhouse gas releases. My final point focuses on biodiversity. Efforts to protect biodiversity are also directly relevant to the Sea of Solutions, with UN and partners working to identify private sector champions for the nearly 470 threatened species in Thailand as a potential model to build coalitions and shared responsibility for sustainability goals. I know Dr. Teresa will share her insights on how innovative financing and biodiversity need to go hand in hand as we move into the panel discussion. This is a global challenge which will demand a new global agreement, setting of global and national targets to address the issue of plastic pollutions. This year, the G20 agreed to engage with the UN in a discussion for such a framework, which I'm sure we are going to hear much more about in our panel. On that note, let's now set the stage with a 2-minute video.
Take, make, use, waste. With only 9% of plastic being recycled after use, most of it ends up in the environment. We all have seen scenes like these more than we can count. Despite being aware of the global plastic waste crisis, we usually handle our trash following the motto, out of sight, out of mind. While governments are imposing plastic bans, substitute materials emerge, and cleanup activities are popping up around the globe, we are missing something important. If we want to be serious about solving this crisis, we must dare to look closer. We need to look at the people, collecting and sorting what we throw away. If we continue to see plastic waste only as a commodity, we will not change our system, because it is people making the system work for us. But how are they treated? By refusing to pay waste workers for their valuable environmental services and denying them basic social support, we are cutting off the roots of this system. With Value Cred, we are bringing waste management experts together to develop scalable solutions for a circular economy that is participatory, inclusive, and transparent. Our mission? Improving the livelihoods of the people behind our plastic waste. Where the global market only sees tradable commodities, we see the people. Join our journey.
Let's move on to our panelists. The first question that I want to pose to our panelists focuses on the big picture. Can you share your top insights on what works or is likely to work in the context of innovative financing to deal with plastic waste and recycling? Each of you have 5 minutes, and I'm going to step in to let you know as your time is nearly finished. We will start with Ina Balik. Ina, over to you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a great honor to have the opportunity to speak to so many important people joining this call. In ValueCred, we have done a landscape research to really understand the new and emerging market of plastic credits, as we wanted to see what has been creating so much hype in the past 24 to 18 months. And we have seen that, as you already very gladly noted, you said that in your opening speech, we see that finance is needed in so many environmental and humanitarian crises that we are currently facing. So we see that we need really to have a broad range of financing mechanisms that are equally important for addressing climate change, addressing the plastic pollution crisis, addressing biodiversity. And we see that we are much more interconnected in this century than we ever have been before. So looking really at emerging trends, looking at market players and different stakeholders, we thought it is really important to engage with all different levels of stakeholders. We have to look from the bottom up and how plastic credits are currently financed. And this is the video you just looked at. We're currently missing to really pay the environmental services for people. But we have to equally address the polluter pays principle. So we're looking at talking to fast-moving consumer good companies and installing the thought and raising awareness about EPR schemes, which are supposedly financing infrastructure and human resources for addressing waste, not only plastic, but really post-consumer waste at the end of its life. And lastly, as well, we have been engaging with various UN bodies, so to say, to see where's the governance framework for this. So we think we have to bring everyone to the table in terms of diversifying and de-risking the financing solutions that we're talking about. I think it really is a joint effort where we have to look at not only one crisis, which is plastic, but as well we have to look at all the different players in the market. So I think we have to bring together UNEP, IUCN for biodiversity. We have to look at the Basel Convention in terms of framework and governance to really bring security into plastic credits markets, which currently are non-regulated. And equally, then we have to talk to enough producers of plastic, or the ones that introduce plastic into the national market, to say, can we bring you the security through engaging UN bodies and institutions, financial institutions, in terms of de-risking and attracting private finance? And can we build a price that is fair and builds for a just transition? So there is really not a one solution fits all, as you just noted, and which I think that's correct. So every country has to really see that they have a broad portfolio of different investment solutions, from bilateral, multilateral, private sector investments, as well as philanthropy coming in. And most recently, as Nicola Stern said during COP26, we have to really bring onto the table as well the IMF and consider their special drawing rights. The discussions were held as well in terms of climate change. But again, I think we need to really have more collaborative thinking, bringing together various topics, but as well bringing together security in the entire financing and regulation structure to make the leverage of financing possible. So I think that's the work we've been focusing on, very much building prices from the bottom up, which are socially fair, to include the people, but as well building a system that is built from the bottom up, but as well from a top down, because we've seen that the fragmented financing approach currently is quite risky, and there is a reluctance from the polluters to invest into these systems as there is no governance framework. And equally, they're concerned about the workers' welfare and human rights infringements, which we are seeing very commonly in the waste sector. That would be the initial thoughts I have. I can go deeper into the next sessions in all of them, but this, I think, is the overall high-level statement to say we have to talk to governments, we have to talk to the private sector, but we certainly have to talk to the people on the ground who have been never paid for their environmental services in the past decades. And we have to make that an inclusive and participatory engagement, which unfortunately as well COP26 has been judged for, of not bringing enough diversity in terms of vulnerable groups onto the table, onto the negotiation table, and have their say. So we want to really mitigate that.
Thank you, Ina. Thank you very much. And the point that you make about very important to talk to government, private sector, and people, while making the whole process inclusive and participatory. And your point about collaborative financing being extremely critical for bringing different innovative solutions to bear to deal with plastic pollutions. I'm sure you're going to dwell much deeper into this issue in our second round of discussion. Let's move on to Steve Hartman. Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Geeta. Good morning, everybody. I'm Steve Hartman. Delighted to be here today to talk to you. I'm a director of Plastic Collective, a social enterprise which was actually set up by myself and my two sisters. And over the years, we've developed Plastic Collective into being one of the world's leading plastic recycling project developers. And we're on the ground. We work on the ground with the projects which originally were small and often remote and vulnerable, but increasingly we're working with larger projects as well. But as I say, we're on the ground struggling with the projects, understanding their pain points and trying to address those pain points. We currently have about a dozen projects in development, in different stages, in different countries across Australia, Africa, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and many more in the queue. And at Plastic Collective, we've been working with plastic credits as a financing mechanism to help recycling projects, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. In fact, we were the first in the world to create a plastic credit system. It was an informal system that was born out of necessity. As we were developing various plastic recycling projects in remote and vulnerable island communities around the Asia Pacific region in 2017, these projects were really struggling to become profitable, and without profitability, the projects are just not sustainable. If projects didn't make money, the communities would just abandon them, and the plastic recycling just simply would not happen. So we looked across at the carbon space, and we saw our carbon friends raising finance to address greenhouse gas emission projects. And we thought, well, if they can do that, then why can't we? And that was the invention of Plastic Collective's plastic credit system 5 years ago. And it's very simple to begin. We found brands that wanted to address plastic waste and address their plastic footprint. Let's say a brand had 100 tons of plastic that it was putting into the environment. That brand would purchase 100 tons of plastic credits. The funding from that purchase would go to the project, and the project would collect on behalf of the brand that 100 tons of plastic. And as a consequence of that partnership, the brand could claim to be plastic net zero or plastic neutral or some similar claim. And thereby the brand would have a short-term solution to address their plastic waste. And this mechanism, it worked perfectly. You know, the projects became profitable and sustainable, and the brands had this short-term solution. And since our modest program began all those years ago, you might now be aware that a global and regulated plastic credit system has been launched back in February this year, which was born out of the 3R initiative and is coordinated by Vera, which is the world's leading sustainability standard setting agency. We've become heavily involved in this new globally regulated plastic credit system. And so for the first time now, brands and projects actually have a fully regulated plastic credit mechanism. There are other mechanisms out there, just like our one, which were unregulated and informal, but now there is a formally regulated system. And this is a good thing. And it is being designed and developed in the framework of the carbon credit systems. And I have a small video, which I believe will be played now, just to give you some insight into how this system works.
12 million tons of plastic, the equivalent of the weight of over 20,000 A380 jets, are estimated to end up in the oceans every year. As a result of overproduction, the underlying take-make-dispose model of the economy, and inadequate waste management. How can we tackle the plastic pollution crisis? Within its value chain, a company should eliminate and minimize unnecessary plastic, design packaging for reuse and recycling, opt for more sustainable materials, and improve end-of-life management. Even in the best scenario, where a company employs all of those strategies, it will still have unavoidable plastic waste leakage. To compensate for the plastic pollution they cannot yet prevent, companies can invest in extended producer responsibility schemes and plastic credits projects. An EPR scheme is a policy approach where producers are held responsible for the costs of end-of-life management of their products or packaging. EPR schemes have positive effects up and down the value chain, making them an ideal tool to push the economy towards circularity. However, they can take many years to design and successfully implement. That's when plastic credits enter the scene. Plastic credits are transferable units representing a specific quantity of plastic that has been prevented from entering the environment through collection and/or recycling. Projects that generate plastic credits can jumpstart and complement EPR schemes by driving funds towards circular infrastructure. Plastic crediting is an innovative financial tool that can bring investment into plastic waste collection systems and new recycling ventures. This new form of finance can also drive social and environmental improvements through the value chain. For example, they support local economies, provide living wages for waste pickers, and generate new job opportunities. Plastic credits must be generated from new, additional activities in order to guarantee investment in increased collection and recycling capacity. Transparent reporting, monitoring, and independent auditing of waste management and recycling systems are all key components of credible plastic crediting. What comes next? Civil society, businesses and governments working together on plastic credits is one way to bring increased capacity and accountability to waste management projects. Global cooperation to increase the circularity of plastic is crucial. We can all be part of the change. Find out more at RRR Initiative.
Thank you. Back to you, Geeta.
Thank you, Steve. And you know, many congratulations to you and your two sisters for piloting the plastic credit system at a project level and making it successful. Right, so many congratulations for that, and even for investing in brands, as you mentioned. We are going to hear more about this as we move along. Let me now invite Luann from CIMB. Luann, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Geeta, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak. Now, I feel like the odd one out here because I am the only person from a bank, but I hope to give a perspective of what financial institutions are doing, what our role is, why we're doing this, and also perhaps a glimpse of how we look at this and perhaps what is in plan for the future. So just to briefly introduce CIMB, we are, as Geeta mentioned, a Malaysian headquartered bank, but we are all over ASEAN, so we're in all ASEAN countries, and we are in 15 markets. Just to give you an estimate of size, we have about 150 billion USD in assets, and I'm very glad that Geeta mentioned the principles for responsible banking, which was driven by the UN Environment Program Finance Initiatives. CIMB was one of the 30 banking members that kind of drafted and put the principles together back in 2018, 2019. So we are very, very invested in this and very committed. So now coming to the topic at hand, the financial services sector really plays a very key influential role in, well, actually all across the value chain. And how I guess does this happen? We look at it from two perspectives. First, it is limiting risk and negative impacts. Now, what do I mean by that? As a financial services provider, we provide financing and we facilitate the activities of our clients. Also, although we are not directly accountable for doing things that are harmful to the environment, for example, such as waste leakage and dumping, we are still indirectly accountable because we are helping or supporting companies that could potentially be doing that. So that's the risk perspective. But on the other side of the coin, a lot of green solutions and sustainable solutions, and not to forget, the social side. Just now we looked at some of the informal sector and their participation. Banks also support the solutions and companies who are actively working towards improving the situation. And we can facilitate and help that through, for example, financing of investments, the investments, for example, for infrastructure and the waste collection infrastructure that is needed in order to be part of this solution. So apart from risk management, which I mentioned earlier, because the risk of our clients is really, for a bank, risk to us, because if a client, for example, is, let's say, their license to operate gets taken away, or they get hit by a massive fine, their profitability suffers, and therefore our returns on that particular client also suffers. So our client's risk is our risk, and this is why we try and limit the risk from not just let's say financial issues, but increasingly banks are starting to look at environmental and social sources of risk that end up being a credit risk to the bank and market risk. So for example, and my unit at CIMB is pretty new. We only started up in 2018, 2019. But what we've started to do, one of the very first things we started to do was to start looking at all our corporate clients, so our large business clients, and scrutinizing what they were doing with the money that they borrowed from us. And for key sectors, we have sector guides or sector policies where if clients do not meet our requirements for them, and these are environmental and social standards, yeah, not talking about financial strength and things like that. If they don't meet these requirements, we will have to agree an action plan with them in order for them to continue their credit relationship with us. And essentially, there's a mechanism. If they don't meet these action plans within the set time frame, if that happens once or twice, then we will essentially say that, okay, we're not going to do business with you moving forward. So that is really on the risk side. I can talk a bit about the positive impact side later on. But really, one thing to highlight is that financial regulations in sustainable finance is really increasing and accelerating really rapidly across the region, and more banks and financial services players are stepping up. So this is a theme that you would see pretty accelerating pretty quickly all across ASEAN, actually. But I'll be happy to talk about that a bit more later on. Thank
you. Thank you, Luan. Very, very helpful, and for helping us understand the potential, the need to limit risks, environment risks, social risks, and governance risks. And these are extremely important for the UN to understand as we engage in our dialogue with bankers and investors, with players like yourselves. And we look forward to hearing more about the green solutions in the next round of discussion. Let me now move to Dr. Teresa. Dr. Teresa, over to you.
Thank you, Geeta, for this opportunity. First, let me tell you something about the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. We're the only ASEAN center in Southeast Asia that coordinates and work among the ASEAN countries to address biodiversity loss. And we also work with international organizations and link them with the ASEAN member states to contribute to the work on conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity in the ASEAN. Of course, the ACB recognizes that plastic pollution is really a threat to coastal and marine ecosystems and to marine biodiversity. And so under ACB's work plan, we support the implementation of the ASEAN Framework of Action on Marine Debris that was adopted in Thailand. And we facilitate discussions on the threats to marine biodiversity, which includes marine litter and habitat and species loss, and also climate change impacts. And we mobilize region-wide initiatives on coastal and marine areas of the ASEAN to address these threats. We also promote partnerships to integrate biodiversity considerations into the management and reduction of marine debris, and raising awareness on the importance of reducing and effectively managing marine wastes. So, my key points, of course, some of because of this responsibility or the mandate that we have for ASEAN, we have organized several meetings and webinars because of the COVID that has limited mobility, but we had most of our meetings now, and the information exchange that we do are of course done virtually. And in the past months, we have been conducting some discussions on sustainable financing mechanisms in ASEAN. And some of the existing mechanisms that were identified was, of course, the payment for ecosystem services. And in the ASEAN region, this is part of the opportunity that can be harnessed to carry out programs that can address plastic pollution. For some examples, of course, for us to be able to tap into this financing mechanism, especially for ASEAN heritage parks, it should be integrated into the management plans of protected areas. Most of the discussion, of course, on sustainable financing that we've had was focused on our banner program, which is ASEAN Heritage Parks. These are protected areas, the cream of the crop of protected areas in the ASEAN region. And in the discussion that we had on sustainable financing, some of the ASEAN member states were able to relay the best practices that they have on sustainable financing of activities of protection in ASEAN heritage parks. And of course, one of them is addressing plastic pollution as a way to maintain the integrity of ASEAN heritage parks. And most especially because AHPs, most of the AHPs are also, well, before the pandemic, they were also top nature tourism sites in the region. And some examples that were provided, of course, was from Vietnam. They have launched their payment for forest ecosystem services mechanism in 2008, where compensations come from hydropower companies, clean water supplies, aquaculture industry, ecotourism industry, and the fees that are generated from this go back to the protected area management and biodiversity conservation. In the Philippines, they have a trust fund for protected areas. This is the Integrated Protected Area Fund, which was created to institutionalize payment for ecosystem services and ensure that the revenues that are generated from protected areas, either from the use of the water, because some protected areas are watershed areas, for resorts, the use of the land, because some protected areas provide the nature, the aesthetic value for tourism, and the revenue that is generated from the 75% goes to the area itself, the protected area on site, and the 25% goes to the national government to be distributed to protected areas all across the country. Other innovative financing mechanisms that were mentioned, that were cited, include the Green Sukuk, which seeks out to finance green development projects, which include pollution management and prevention. This type, it's a green bond. It's being used in Malaysia and in Indonesia, to provide funding for green projects. Okay, and another example that was cited by the ASEAN member states is crowdfunding, a mechanism that raises small amounts of money from a large number of people. And now, of course, with the use of social media, it has also been used as a mechanism to raise awareness and a good initial activity in drumming up the conversations for continued and sustainable financing. So these are just some of the examples that these are just some general insights that were provided on what has been working in Southeast Asia, in the ASEAN, as far as the innovative financing for protected areas is concerned. And of course, part of this is addressing the trash and waste problem in our national parks in Southeast, in the ASEAN. So back to you, Geeta. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Teresa, for sharing your insights, and specifically the point that you made about integrating plastic pollution and recycling into management plans for protected areas. The three examples that you picked up from Vietnam, Philippines, and Indonesia are extremely interesting, and I'm sure there are other examples that you have. I'm wondering whether you can share the electronic link for these examples in our chat function. That would be much, much appreciated. Let's now move on to the second round of discussion, which focuses on practical issues. And I'm going to request the panelists now to share an example of a project undertaken by your respective organizations that could serve as a pilot to leverage innovative financing to advance plastic waste collection and recycling. And we are this time going to start with Luann. Luann, over to you.
Thank you very much. Now, as I mentioned, as a financial services provider, we obviously don't get directly involved in recycling projects unless it's for our own waste. But really, that is not our biggest impact. It is really through our clients, and there are various things that we're doing with our clients and trying to encourage our clients to do on the positive impact side. So CIMB has and we recently announced this, I think about 2 months ago now. We just announced a sustainable finance target where we're committed to mobilize 30 billion ringgit by 2024. That is about 7.2 billion US dollars. So this is something that CIMB across the region is really, really keen to do. And we are actively looking to support our clients in sustainability and in sustainable finance, although it is not only limited to plastic waste or marine health. We really look across the spectrum on environmental and social issues. But this is for sure one of the areas of focus that we are looking at. Yeah. So looking at the kind of things and the types of clients that we support, we're really across the value chain. So what do I mean by that, right? For example, we support the government in their financing, for example. We also work with big corporates. They could be local corporates and multinationals. We also work with SMEs in all the countries that we're in, and it can be even very, very small companies, and even down to the individual, right? So we, as a financial institution, we kind of are across the entire value chain. So what do we and what can we do? Yeah. So there are a number of things that we're doing. So for example, we were one of the banks that helped both the Malaysian government and Indonesian government issue their sustainability bonds in the last 12 months. Yeah, and this was the first sustainable bond that was issued by the Malaysian government. And a lot of the use of proceeds are going to be earmarked into green and social uses. And there is a very clear framework on what the proceeds can be used for. So this is where a bank like us comes in. But with corporates, for example, we also have instruments like, I'm sure you've heard about green loans, but we also have things like sustainability linked loans, which is a relatively new kind of instrument in this part of the world. Essentially, it is a for an SLL or sustainability linked loan, the proceeds do not need to be for any specific green purpose or green asset. However, we will agree on a set of sustainability performance targets with the client. And if the client meets those targets on a year-to-year basis, we will then kind of reward that client by giving them a discount on their interest or financing rate. So this is how it becomes a win-win, where our clients become less risky and more sustainable, and our clients kind of get a kind of a sweetener from CIMB. And we've put out quite a number of these, and we've had targets, for example, linked to greenhouse gas emissions, but also some other targets we look at are things like waste to landfill, percentage recycled content, etc., etc. So a lot can be done there. Now the world of sustainable finance and innovative instruments is really, really broad. There's so many things. Sustainability linked derivative, we just did the first one in Malaysia, which was ringgit based, very, very cool. We also actually work a lot with our SMEs, and we support a lot of recyclers, those handling wastewater, etc. And we actually have a program that we really like. It's called Green Biz Ready, and it's literally a one-stop shop program where we work with our SME clients. We help them to get a baseline of where they are on sustainability. We help them to assess where their gaps are, and we actually work with them to map out a kind of a transition plan of how they can improve in terms of sustainability. And we also introduce them to partners who can help them improve and things like that. So there are a lot of things going on. Supply chain financing as well, where SMEs can be supported by their primary. So, for example, their key purchaser in terms of credit strength. And for individuals, we also have incentives to encourage green practices, such as greenhouse, green cars, but not yet anything on plastic. This is something that we're exploring now. And of course, raising awareness amongst the consumers who are really a key part of this chain. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luann. And thank you for, showcasing how CIMB works with governments to establish green and social bonds with big corporates around sustainability loans. And this is the first time I'm hearing about the concept of sustainability loans with SMEs and individuals. I'm sure we are going to get a question very soon about whether CIMB also supports projects that are led by NGOs and civil society organizations. So be ready to answer that question. Let's move on to our next panelist. I'm going to invite Dr. Teresa to step in. Dr. Teresa, over to you.
Hi, Gita. Well, I mentioned earlier about our programs on ASEAN Heritage Parks. That's a banner program in ASEAN where we are able to support as well the preparation of and updating of their management plans so that waste management, addressing plastic pollution can also be addressed. Some examples where we were able to support the preparation of management plans include our projects with the small grants, our small grants program with the German government, the GIZ, and we also have a BCAM project with the European Union, and we have supported the development of management plans for Fushengtong National Park and Nampui National Parks in Lao PDR. Where it involves 19, the Nampui involves working closely with 19 villages, including ethnic groups, and promoting alternative livelihood activities, which include sustainable tourism. And when you talk about sustainable tourism, of course, we need a clean environment to become attractive to nature tourists. We also have, under the Small Grants Program, we've supported the preparation of management plans for Indauji Lake Wildlife Sanctuary in Myanmar, and it includes community-based systems, developing implementation of community-based systems for waste management, including technical and material assistance required for communities in establishing waste collection and management systems. Also, the Main Malachun Wildlife Sanctuary in Myanmar also includes, their management plan includes the standard operating procedure for waste management of the park. So that actually provides leverage for more support to assist the communities to finance their operations, to implement their management plans. That includes, addressing the problem of waste and plastics. We also support. There's also the ASEAN Heritage Park in the Philippines, the Tubataha Reef Natural Park. We have supported some activities which include the survey on sharks that migrate across the Tubataha and also feed in the Tubataha reefs. And this actually helped the park management assess local and global stressors contributing to the status of the species in the area. So with those support, it leverages additional activities. The park has developed a fee collection and permit system, and also they have imposed the ban for single-use plastic products in the park. And there are also educational and awareness raising campaigns in the communities, and strongly encourages private sector partners to use environmentally sustainable products and services in Tubataha. There were also studies that were conducted in Tubataha. They in 2019, actually the park generated for its integrated protected area, for its trust fund, around $374,000 per year. And well, it sort of declined because of the pandemic situation, the decline in tourist visits. But of course, this is expected to rise again after as we relax the mobility restrictions in the ASEAN, and the situation gets better. But there's proof that some of the revenue that is being generated by the protected area goes partially to addressing plastics through conservation education, through education awareness programs in the communities, and for tourists as well. And of course, it leverages partnership with the private sector, who also are interested to invest in the management and protection of the area. So there are because of that, international support has also been attracted by the activities that is being initiated in Tubataha Reef National Park. And so the communication campaigns have also been successful in a way, and part of the expenses that is being used is from the fees that are generated and then generated by the park and allocated for the purpose of addressing the plastic pollution in Tubataha Reef. So yeah, I think that's so that's an example that I can provide for some of the protected areas, the ASEAN heritage parks that we are supporting as the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity in the region. Thank you. Back to you, Gita.
Thank you, Dr. Teresa, and thank you for sharing examples of the small grants program provided by GIZ and the European Union, and your examples about how you've engaged in community-based systems for waste collection and recycling, awareness raising, communications campaign, using permits and people action to deal with marine and plastic pollution is brilliant. We look forward to seeing the electronic link that you will soon make available. In the meantime, let's move on to our next panelist, Steve Hartman. Steve, over to you to share your example of a project.
Great, thank you, Gita. Well, we actually have many projects that we'd love to talk about that have all been successful as a consequence of the plastic credit financing mechanism. But I might break it down into a few groups and talk about, first of all, small projects. And that's our heritage, where we come from. But I'd also like to talk about large projects, so infrastructure projects at a municipality level, which is an area where we're becoming increasingly involved in. And then the third thing I'd just quickly like to touch upon is the introduction of a new credit mechanism, which is a plastic carbon combination credit. Just say a few words about that, because I think it opens up some really interesting opportunities for projects. So just looking first of all at small projects, there's two quite common quite common pain points for small projects. The first one is just simply accessing capital to establish their project in the first place, which is understandable. The other point is well, actually, let me focus on the capital first. The credit mechanism can operate to support both upfront capital, or can be used to support working capital or downstream operational funding support. And so we've been very successful in encouraging brands to not only pay for the credits as they receive them when material is recycled, but also to make advance payments to projects in order to establish the projects in the first place. And this has been been very transformational to the projects. So it enables them to be financed where other finances such as debt or equity or even grant financing, are unwilling to go into this space with these small projects, because they operate at a community level. They are, on the face of it, a very difficult type of project to finance. So credit mechanism works extremely well for these small projects. The other aspect is these projects have a cost profile. Small projects tend to have a cost profile which is different to many larger recycling projects. Small projects tend to be located in remote locations. For example, island communities or rural communities, indigenous communities. And related to that is the tyranny of distance. And as a consequence of tyranny of distance, the output of a recycling activity in a remote location will often have to travel large distances to go into a recycling market in an urban area. And that additional cost to move that material to these urban recycling centres, it really breaks their financial model. And so the plastic credits can provide extra operational revenues, which usually more than compensate for this additional cost that they incur. So the plastic credits can have this dual benefit of providing upfront capital to get them going, but also provide operational support, and essentially an additional revenue line to keep them going. So that's the small projects, and we're seeing this repeated project after project. So our very first 3 projects one was a small project in Les Village on the north side of Bali in Indonesia. Another one was an island called Mantanani Island in Malaysia, 750 people on a very remote island. And the third project that was in the Whitsundays in Australia, collecting, recovering plastic from the hundreds of islands that are in the Whitsundays. And in all those cases, they really had no financial pathway forward until we came along with the credit mechanism. And to today, we're still funding them with credits on an ongoing basis. And those projects are successful and addressing plastic waste and making very big impact in the communities that they work in. So that's the small projects. The bigger projects typically will be based in urban areas, so they don't tend to have the issue relating to tyranny of distance, but they do have the same fragile cost and revenue profiles. The revenues that you generate from recycled plastic output are heavily influenced by the price of oil. And there's some inverse relationships that go on there, and so the value of recycled plastic moves is quite volatile, and this can turn a project which is 1 year sustainable into the next year being unsustainable. And this risk profile with their revenues makes financing of bigger projects quite risky. And so your traditional debt and equity and even grant mechanisms often struggle to finance these projects. And so we are working with traditional financing channels to introduce the plastic credit mechanism and the plastic credit financing opportunity as a blended solution. So a larger, recycling project, which might be happening at a municipal waste management level, which will be often requiring tens of millions of dollars of investment, can now take on investment, which is a combination of debt, maybe some grant funding, possibly equity funding if it's a private enterprise, but also some plastic credit funding. And this can be really quite transformational to the financing of these projects. So this is a new area of development, and one which I'd love to talk to more banks about. We're having many conversations around this, and we're developing packages we're developing these packages as we speak. So that's the larger projects. I'd just like to touch upon also the launch of the plastic carbon combination credit. Now, this is a new credit mechanism which is in development at the moment with VERA. VERA is the regulator of the global plastic credit system. I'm working with them and running a working group to develop this credit mechanism. And so this will be a new credit which will enable a project, when they become certified to generate plastic credits, they will also be able to simultaneously generate carbon credits. So, and the reason why they can do that is because every time you recycle plastic, you reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And that reduction in greenhouse gas emissions relates to the displacement of the production of virgin plastic, which is a carbon intensive activity. And we're finding already in conversations with small projects and big projects actually, that this is a highly attractive proposition for projects because it's more revenue. They not only can sell plastic credits, they can also sell carbon credits, but the combination of the two also really is a very wholesome sustainability activity. They're covering the two key bases that they are under enormous pressure to address. And interestingly, if you're looking at an entire supply chain, and let's say at one end, the industrial end of the supply chain, you have a resin producer that perhaps they produce PET plastic, which would be used in polyester and drink bottles, for example. And then you have down the other end of the supply chain, the clothing, Adidas that might be using polyester in their garments, or you might be Pepsi using the plastic bottles in for their drinks. We're finding the interest level for the plastic carbon combination credit is diverging, where the carbon credits have an interest at the industrial end of the recycling supply chain, so the PET resin manufacturer, but the plastic credits are of most interest to the brands that face the consumers, whom are being pressured by consumers to address the plastic waste that they produce. And so we believe this is going to be a very powerful mechanism to provide solutions for projects and brands that hopefully will go live next year.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Thank you very much. And I'm sure we are going to hear more about the plastic and carbon combination credit, which a lot of people are going to be interested in. And I'm sure UNEP is going to be very interested in as well. Let's quickly move on to Ina. We are running out of time. Ina, over to you to share an example of the kind of research that you people are undertaking. Over to you, Ina.
Thank you. I'm very happy, first of all, to see the great panelists I'm sharing a session with. So this is amazing. So I've been writing a lot of notes. I think it may not come to any surprise to any of you that working for UNO's Environment Hub, which is co-funded by Nobel Peace Prize laureate Muhammad Yunus, the father of microfinancing to enable social transformation, we're looking at the entire sustainability debate from quite a unique angle, and one I haven't heard before. We're looking at sustainability really in investing into humans, not necessarily into technology, into commodities, or into projects as such. We think that we can achieve best results by really focusing on people who make everything work. In the end of the day, every innovation in the world is being driven by a human brain. So maybe what I will be saying in my remaining minutes now is quite controversial. After a lot of landscape review and a lot of interviews with different levels of stakeholders, we decided in ValueCred that we actually no longer will use the word project. And that's because a project is, by its definition, it has a start point, it has an end point, and whatever has an end point can't be defined as sustainable. So we really want to scrap and provoke a new debate or have a new narrative in how we are dealing with sustainability questions. Twofold. First of all, really refocusing on human rights and the people who are standing behind every single movement in this world, including as well flora and fauna, though, for biodiversity, because I think it's all about empowering those who are normally not empowered, because the global commodity markets are looking at commodities and trades and prices, and the banks are doing the same. And I'm very happy as well to hear from Luan that they are working on de-risking and they're looking at ESG criteria. So what we are doing in ValueCred, as we have done the market research, and we listened to the concerns, we listened to the stakeholders of companies who, surprisingly, we found are not very appreciative at the moment on how the plastic credit market is developing. We have to understand why that is, because while we still think they have a valid place and they're very important, as Steve pointed out, to build the bridge towards EPR, because EPR installations can take a long, long time. We really are working on a process model now in ValueCred, which is not based on credits, but it's based upon the principles of EPR. So it would be more called a voluntary EPR scheme than anything else, because EPR schemes, as we know, globally have been the most effective in bringing finance to human resource and infrastructure. And this is what we're currently seeing. There is millions of projects on the market, and we have seen in the past 25 years. So we're working with waste management companies with a combined operational and logistical experience of over 100 years in ValueCred. So this is quite unique. We're not coming necessarily from the carbon sector, but we're coming from the waste management sector. And the tyranny of distance is a great example. So logistics is currently not really factored in. So what we want to do is really say, if we take the entire sustainability debate from an EPR angle, the EPR will always have cost calculations behind to really say how much does the logistics cost, how much is transport, how much is infrastructure build up, how much is human resource investment, how many people do I need for certain areas. So we really want to bring a completely new bottom-up calculation that is currently used in Europe, and we have proper cost calculations. Because what is happening in the absence of any models or management systems for smaller companies or projects on the ground, they have to accept whatever the market is dictating in terms of commodity pricing. So they pay X amount of dollars for a ton of plastic. That may not suffice to pay the people. It will certainly not suffice to pay the infrastructure. And talking about plastic waste, this is not a plastic issue. It's a global waste management issue. And this has been recognized, I think, as well by the Basel Convention, that a lot of waste issues really are coming from the fact that waste management infrastructure in the global south is insufficient. And we are not looking at basically financing from banks, but we say there is, EPR is taking the polluter into responsibility and accountability. So we're looking to long-term leverage financing from the brands and the people who place the plastic into the market, taking away the entire project approach and say, as long as you produce plastic and you introduce that into national markets as a brand, as a fast-moving consumer good company, you have the accountability and responsibility to finance the take back and bring it back into circularity. So this is a completely new approach, and that's something we've been working on to really reframe the entire narrative around plastic credits, where we see there is a need, but I think it needs some rethinking in terms of the kind of the language we use and what we're focusing on. So really by focusing on human investment, we will automatically increase the amount of tonnages we can collect, because if people feel that they're being paid fairly and they're being treated fairly, they will do the work in scalable ways. So this is something that we've been working on based on the research and based on several discussions with big companies who are very concerned about the lack of transparency in these processes, which we're working towards as well.
Thank you, Ina. And you know, it's interesting to see how you are reframing and redefining the narrative on sustainability with a focus on human rights, and literally coming at it from the people end of the spectrum. And this whole thing of, you know, how you're using EPR to enhance accountability and transparency, and arrive at reliable cost calculations. I see a question in the chat which also indirectly focuses on this, and you can bear that in mind when we go to the Q&A session. But let's move on at this point in time, and let's give our panelists a break for a couple of minutes as we engage the audience to directly contribute to the discussion on innovative financing. We've set up a poll for all our audiences to take. I encourage everyone to use the poll tab, which is on the right side of your screen. This should be next to the chat tab, which you can see to pose questions to the panelists. And we have 3 questions for the poll. And we're going to give you a couple of minutes to answer each question. And do remember that your answers will help our panelists to inform recommendations that they are going to be making as part of our 3rd round of discussion. So let's have the first question up on the screen. And the question is, do you see a potential for plastic credits to become a viable financial instrument among other finance mechanisms? You have 2 options, yes and no. We would encourage everyone to take the poll because it makes this session that much more interesting. I'm hoping everyone has had an opportunity to press the button that they desire. Let's move on now to the second poll question. And the question reads, what is the most significant improvement that needs to happen for the plastic credit mechanism to thrive? And you have 4 options in front of you. Click the one that you believe is the most important. And this is particularly going to help Ina and Steve as they think through the plastic credit mechanisms in their respective fields. Your 4 options are up there: adaptation of the plastic credit market for a global governance framework, harmonized definitions, terminologies, and performance indicators. Your 3rd option is mandatory polluter pay principles for the private sector. And finally, plastic credit mechanisms to be designed in alignment with EPR principles. Brilliant. I hope everyone has had an opportunity to click on their choice. Let's move on to the final question, poll question. And the final poll question is simple. Should the plastic credit system piggyback on the carbon trading mechanism? Yes and no. And I know UNEP has been thinking a lot about this particular question. So your answer will definitely be considered, will be taken on board as UNEP takes this whole discussion forward internally within the UN system. Thank you all. Thank you for taking the poll. I'm sure we are going to have the results coming in soon. while we get the results flowing in, let's move on to a third round of discussion. And the third round, I would request each of the panelists to take 3 minutes each. We've only got 15 minutes left. We want to keep the remaining 2-3 minutes to summarize the key takeaways from a UN perspective. And the question is simple. From where you sit, what would you recommend to the UN, private sector, member states, or civil society to advance action and find solutions in support of reducing plastics? As you frame your answers, please be as specific as possible in your recommendations, as your points will be considered by the UN and other stakeholders as we take this process forward. And let's start with Ina. Ina, over to you.
Thank you. I have a long list of recommendations. I'll try to keep it short, though. The most important one for us is really to see some lined-up thinking. There is a lot of initiatives on different UN bodies, just to mention a few. So IUCN is working on a new 2030 biodiversity agenda as the last decade came to an end. And biodiversity obviously is of concern, as we've heard from our panelists as well. We have the Basel Convention working on 3 guidelines, which are all pertinent and important for plastic credits. So they have guidance on the informal sector, they have guidance on plastic waste management in an environmentally sound manner, and they have guidance as well in terms of policy platforms. So I think really looking at other UN bodies and lining up in terms of financing mechanisms, how they can co-benefit from co-financing. So I don't think there need to be dedicated funds from, let's say, private sector or from banking systems, which are uniquely going to plastic pollution. How can they be brought together under one umbrella and maybe as a shared co-financing together with biodiversity goals or carbon goals, because they are really intrinsically interwoven, so we can't separate out these issues on a global frame. Human rights and sustainability goals. We have the 2030 agenda on human rights and sustainable development. However, again, they are not yet fully incorporated or insufficiently incorporated into the debates of financing, long-term financing, and the plastic credits as well. We have the ILO, the International Labour Organization. We have the Global Living Wage Coalition in terms of really fostering the debate on living standards. So I think there is so much movement in the world where we are indulging in our own little echo chambers, if I may say so, missing the opportunity to really come to a big table and have the round table discussion. We are all fighting for the same. Unfortunately, we are missing out opportunities to really link up. So I think lined up thinking between UN bodies, the IMF, financial institutions, and as well the broad scope of plastics really open up and bring all the financing and the power together, so we don't have to all go through the weeds and start from zero again. So it's something that we have been seeing that unfortunately that is not yet efficiently done, and therefore a lot of resources we could say are wasted because we are reinventing the wheel again and again. So that's something we would certainly say, just learn from others, because we are all on the same trajectory in learning and pushing sustainability forward. The second thing that we're really keen on, and we have experienced in our market research, there is a lack of transparency and harmonization. So what we are pushing for in terms of advocacy work right now, which I'm doing with UNEP, with IUCN, and with you, of course, here as well, is to push for harmonization and push for adaptation of the plastic credit market by one of the UN bodies. It clearly needs a global framework and a governance. This is what we have been hearing as well from stakeholders. They're very reluctant at that moment to see that standard setters push themselves into the market. However, they don't have the mandate or the authority. And this doesn't liberate finance, because we will get very limited financing opportunities if the credits we generate are not credible. So I think we need a UN body to really look at that. So I'm trying to talk with UNEP, with the Basel Convention and IUCN to take the agenda of plastic credits on a higher level, so to say, because currently they're only dominated by the private sector. And certainly, I think the last question of the poll would be a no from me. This is something we have learned as well. And again, COP26 speaks for itself. We have to learn from the past, and the Kyoto Protocol, specifically the CDM, has failed. And that's not my personal opinion. It's a wider market opinion. It has been reflected in the pricing. They went as low as $0.2 per ton of CO2 because they were generating hot air. At best, today, the knowledge is that it was a zero-sum game. At worst, they actually undermined national policies to come up with strong mitigation efforts. And certainly, if at all we have a carbon market copy mechanism for plastic credits, I strongly recommend that we have to install a share of proceeds. And this share of proceeds needs to be installed for infrastructure and research for technologies that enhance circular economy. So without a share of proceeds, I don't think that the piggybacking on carbon markets under the current framework are sustainable. So these would be my 3 concrete recommendations: lined up thinking, harmonization and definition and language, and a global governance framework that aligns. Thirdly, learning from the past. There's a reason why CDM stopped in 2012. And I think that we should really analyze and step back and say, are we maybe due to copy the same mistakes, which gave low pricing, instability, hot air discussions that people don't trust them. And more importantly, as we all know, they give rise to the social justice movement and the climate justice movements. So we have to really learn from past mistakes and do so much better.
Thank you, Ina. Let's move on to Dr. Teresa. Dr. Teresa, in 2 minutes, can you set out the key recommendations that you would like us to consider?
Okay, thank you, Geeta. As I mentioned the example of Tubataha Reef, one of the studies that they conducted is the plastic waste that they are able to collect from the protected area is that it's coming from all over. It's not just from the nearest community, but it's coming from all the other areas that are adjacent to the Bataha Reefs, and so and from all other countries, no? Not just from the Philippines as well. So there must be a systematic and integrated regional response to marine plastic pollution. Marine ecosystems are interconnected, and thus marine plastic pollution is also is a regional issue. Therefore, the region can really be guided by the ASEAN Regional Action Planning for combating marine debris in the ASEAN. The framework is already there, so we need to be able to use this to move forward. We need to harness existing sustainable financing mechanisms that are already out there. Which I already mentioned. This can be, and this should be. It's important that this be incorporated into the management plans of protected areas. Sustainable tourism activities should include efforts, of course, to address plastic pollution. Operators, therefore, the private sector, the tourism operator, the businesses should step up in their commitment to sustainability and reducing plastic wastes. For payment for ecosystem services to work, there must be a support for valuation of ecosystem services. This will improve the computation and the determination of the charges and the fees that can be used for ecosystem services. Community participation is essential for the sustainability of the action. So it's important. I agree earlier that this should not just be considered a project, but if there is a so this is actually if there is involvement of the communities, then the actions can be more cost effective and sustainable to address plastic pollutions. Incentives should also are important to put in place innovative solutions, support for livelihoods, additional incomes and endeavors related to efforts against plastic pollution must be considered. Incentives for the communities and for the private sector as well. And then for the solutions, we need to be, of course, we need to assess the technological solutions as well to make sure that they're biodiversity friendly and no harm will be caused towards communities and biodiversity itself. So back to you, Geeta.
Thank you, Dr. Teresa. We are running out of time. I'm going to request Luann to step in. and be very, very brief. We want to keep some time for the Q&A.
Yes, thank you. I have three things from a financial services perspective. Firstly, to accelerate financial regulations to ensure that all banks get on board with this and to make sure that these requirements are harmonized across the region. Without all banks on board, the stricter banks that are trying to do the right thing will lose out. And in fact, what's going to happen is that the bad actors or the banks who say, hey, I will continue financing polluters, they will make even more money. So it's really sending the wrong signal. Very important. The second thing I would say is, and there was a question about, do we work with NGOs? The answer is yes, we would love to. However, these projects for a commercial bank need to be bankable, and therefore we need global and international multilateral financing and co-funding to come in to work with companies like us. So CIMB is actively looking for blended finance opportunities to help fund some of these currently as yet unviable projects. The third thing I would say, third recommendation, is to put down some mandatory disclosures, I guess starting with listed companies on plastic use, plastic pollution, and how they handle plastic waste, because transparency really drives awareness and action. Thank you.
Thank you, Luann. I'm going to request Steve to come in. Steve, your 2 minutes. You
Brilliant.
have the 2 minutes.
Thanks, Geeta. I'll do it in 60 seconds for you. Three things: education and awareness of the plastic credit system for both brands and projects, and especially focus, as Ina has said, on the integrity and the governance of the plastic credit system, which is quite extensive. Second point is work with other finance providers to blend credit financing mechanisms, plastic credit financing mechanisms, with equity, debt, and grant channels. And third, work with governments to blend the plastic credit mechanism into extended producer responsibility programs, because the two fit perfectly together. That's it for me.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you very much. I know we were meant to keep 10 minutes for the Q&A. However, we've run out of time. We've got 3 minutes, but I'm not going to ditch the questions that you provided to us. I noticed we've got about 6 questions, and I'm going to request, and there are 3 questions specifically for Steve to answer. Steve, I'm going to request you to use the chat function to answer the 3 questions that have been posed. The first is about how best to support subnational governments in underdeveloped economies to mainstream plastic credit schemes in waste management with easy to use monitoring tools. That's your first question. Please use the chat function. The second, which I think you've indirectly answered, can your scheme on waste management work in Australia as well? Right, and I noticed that you are using the chat function to answer that. And the final question, Steve, for you is: would you be able to provide a web link about the financing facility that you discussed? So please use the chat function to address these 3 questions. My next set of questions are to Luann. Luann, you've got 3 questions, and again, use the chat function. The first question is, how do you determine the true cost of water and carbon footprint? And could CIMB or others contribute in that sense, help determine the strategy? The second question is on the kinds of companies that engage with banks to achieve sustainable financing. What are the kinds of companies that reach out to CIMB and other banks? And the third question, Luann, focuses on how do you measure, manage, and or reduce pollution footprint of projects that you finance through CIMB? So please do use the chat function to answer that. And Ina, there's a question for you to answer from Sarah. And the question focuses on what nomenclature language do you use at UNIS Environment Hub to describe projects, right? So it'll be if you could get onto the chat function and share your thoughts. In the meantime, I'm not going to attempt to summarize the session today, but I'm going to be inviting Dr. Vincent Eliosas from UNEP, who manages the Sea Circular project and is an expert on market-based mechanisms, plastic value chains, and has worked across Southeast Asia, to step in to share his three top takeaways from the discussion this morning. So, Vincent, over to you.
Thank you, Geeta. It's been such an exciting discussion today. You know, all experts and with great experience, we've learned so much. You said 3, but I actually got 4, and I'm going to ask the tech team to actually put up my just a one-page slide here, and these are just the key points that I have. I'm going to take as my takeaway, and I think it's really important for me to just speak a little bit on this. So when we talk about extended producer responsibility, when we talk about circularity, it's quite clear now that plastic credits, is going to be the currency to make it all happen. And I'm really encouraged to hear that there's so much development in it, but it's still at quite an early stage. And I keep hearing the word harmonization. So standards for plastic credits need to be harmonized, and we need to really set the game so that everybody has place to the same rules. And so I'm also hearing about a governance framework for plastic credits. And this is something that will give a lot of comfort and confidence for people, for project developers, for EPR to work. And where would this institution be that, where we can provide the foundation for this governance framework? Could it be UNEP, or could it be part of the Global Plastic Agreement? So this is something that will be great to see happen in the very near future. And then I'm hearing also about bankability of projects. So yes, on one hand we have plastic credits who are still in a state of flux, and then we are also talking about carbon credits. How can we learn from the mistakes? Is it possible to piggy bank? Should there be a one size fit all? Possibly not. We've heard that from Ina. But to make projects bankable and to see entrepreneurship and to see innovation, we need to have to de-risk projects with really stable credits that banks could confidently take on and support these projects. And finally, this is the recent UN principles on responsible investment and banking. I think this is one good way to encourage banks and financial institutions to encourage responsible business conduct. And by doing this, there are clients who are involved in the plastic value chain, to be able to look at some of the factors on responsible investment and banking to see that we can encourage businesses who are already in the plastic value chain to embrace circularity, reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, but at the same time also address the plastic circularity issue. So I would sum it up as that, Geeta, and I'm aware of the time. So back to you.
Thank you, Vincent, and thank you for zooming on to the 4 most important points. And I'm sure UNEP is going to be looking at your recommendations very closely. Let me sum up by highlighting the key findings from the poll today. I noticed that 2/3 of the audience have polled in support of the plastic credit mechanism, and for the plastic credit mechanism to piggyback off the carbon trading mechanism. We've also seen more than 60% of the audience highlighting the need for the polluter pay principles and for the plastic credits and for the plastic credit system to be aligned to the EPR principles. I'm sure both Ina and Steve are very happy with the poll results here. So let me thank you all for joining us this morning for the discussion on innovative financing to keep plastics in the economy and out of the environment. I would also like to thank our 4 panelists who have created the time to be with us today and share their insights. And finally, many thanks to UNEP and the technical team for making this a smooth and glitch-free event. Wishing you all a very lovely day ahead. And with this, we sign off for today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.